Reaching the age of 100 is something very few people ever experience. And for Dick Van Dyke, it represents far more than a long life. It represents a living connection to the golden age of Hollywood, a time when television was new, movies were magical, and entertainers were treated like family members inside people's homes. Dick Van Dyke is not just an actor who survived a century. He is a witness to an entire era of entertainment history that has slowly faded away. Over the course of his 100 years, he has experienced incredible success, joyful moments, and unforgettable achievements. But living that long also means facing a painful reality that many people do not talk about. It means watching people you love, work with, and grow alongside slowly disappear. For Dick Van Dyke, the greatest cost of living so long has been saying goodbye again and again to friends who helped shape both his career and his heart. From the outside, Dick's life looks like a dream. He danced across rooftops in Mary Poppins, made families laugh every week on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and remained active and cheerful even into his 90s. His smile became one of the most comforting images in American entertainment. But behind that smile is a man who has carried decades of memories, friendships, and grief. Many of the people who stood beside him during the most important moments of his career are no longer here. These were not just co-stars or business partners. They were people who shared meals, jokes, fears, and dreams with him during long days and nights in studios, theaters, and homes. Losing them was not like losing co-workers. It was like losing pieces of his own life story. As Dick Van Dyke reached his later years, especially after turning 90, the reality of loss became more constant. Each passing year brought news that another familiar voice had gone quiet. Another creative partner had taken a final bow. The entertainment world often focuses on fame and success, but Dick's story reminds us that even legends feel loneliness. At 100 years old, he often looks back not just at awards or performances, but at the faces of friends who once filled his days with laughter. These memories are not painful because they are sad. They are painful because they were once so full of life. Dick Van Dyke has always spoken openly about the importance of human connection. He believed that joy comes from working with people you trust and admire. That belief shaped his career choices and the relationships he formed. Many of those relationships lasted for decades, growing stronger with time. When those people pass away, the losses felt deep and personal. Each death marked the end of a chapter, not only in Hollywood history, but in Dick's own life. For him, grief is not about one moment of sadness. It is about the quiet absence that follows, the empty chair at the dinner table, or the missing voice that once made him laugh. This article explores the 6 celebrity deaths that affected Dick Van Dyke most deeply. These were individuals who influenced his career, supported him during difficult times, and helped create some of the most beloved entertainment ever made. Their passing did not just change the industry. It changed Dick Van Dyke himself. Through their stories, we begin to understand what it truly means to live a century. It is not just about surviving time. It is about remembering those who made that time meaningful. Long before Dick Van Dyke became a symbol of joy and energy on television screens around the world, he was simply a young boy growing up in a modest American household. He was born in 1925 in the small town of West Plains, Missouri, and later raised in Danville, Illinois. His family did not have much money, and life was simple in every sense of the word. There were no grand dreams of fame or fortune during his early years. Instead, Dick grew up learning the value of kindness, hard work, and community. These early lessons would later shape the way he treated people throughout his long career. Even as a child, Dick was known for his boundless energy. He loved to move, run, perform little jokes, and make people laugh. That natural love for movement and humor became the foundation of everything he would later become as a teenager. Dick Van Dyke did not imagine himself as a Hollywood star. In fact, at one point, he seriously considered becoming a minister. He was deeply involved in his church and enjoyed speaking to people and offering comfort. This detail is important because it reveals something essential about his personality. Even before fame, Dick was someone who cared deeply about human connection. He enjoyed listening, supporting others, and being part of community. These qualities later made him more than just a performer. They made him a trusted friend and partner to many people in the entertainment industry. When he joined his high school drama club, It was not because he wanted applause, but because it felt natural. Being on stage allowed him to communicate emotions, ideas, and joy in a way that words alone could not. World War II interrupted Dick's early adulthood, as it did for many people of his generation. He joined the United States Army Air Forces, but even there his natural instincts showed through. Rather than fighting on the front lines, he entertained fellow soldiers through shows and radio work. In difficult and uncertain times, Dick became a source of light for others. This experience taught him something powerful. He realized that entertainment was not just about fun. It was about lifting people's spirits during hard moments. This understanding stayed with him for the rest of his life and shaped how seriously he took his responsibility as an entertainer. After the war, Dick began working in radio and early television, an industry that was still being invented. Performers were not distant celebrities at that time. They worked closely together, often doing multiple jobs and spending long hours side by side. These early years helped Dick form deep bonds with the people he worked with. Because everyone was learning together, friendships formed quickly and strongly. Dick's warm personality, humility, and willingness to work hard made him someone people trusted. He did not see colleagues as rivals. He saw them as partners. This mindset would later lead some of the most meaningful relationships of his life. These early experiences explain why loss affected Dick Van Dyke so deeply later in life. The friendships he formed were not shallow or temporary. They were built over decades of shared struggles, creativity, and success. When those people pass away, he was not just losing famous names from Hollywood history. He was losing friends who had been part of his journey since the beginning. Understanding Dick's humble beginnings helps us understand why the deaths of those close to him left such a lasting mark on his heart. His life was never just about fame. It was always about people. Among all the people Dick Van Dyke worked with during his long career, few relationships were as meaningful as the one he shared with Mary Tyler Moore. Their connection went far beyond the screen and became one of the most important creative and emotional partnerships in television history. When the Dick Van Dyke Show was being developed in the early 1960s, the producers struggled to find the right actress to play Laura Petrie, the wife of Dick's character, Rob Petrie. They auditioned many women, but none of them felt quite right. What the show needed was not just a pretty face or a good actress. It needed someone who could match Dick's energy, timing, and natural physical comedy. When Mary Tyler Moore walked into the audition room, everything changed almost instantly. At the time, Mary was still very young and relatively unknown. She had appeared in commercials and small roles, but nothing that truly showed her full talent. From the moment she read her lines, it was clear she was different. She had a unique voice, expressive movements, and a quiet confidence that balanced Dick's high energy perfectly. Dick Van Dyke later said that he knew immediately she was special. On screen, their chemistry felt natural and effortless. Audiences across America believed they were watching a real married couple because their interactions felt honest and warm. What many viewers did not realize was that this chemistry came from genuine respect and friendship behind the scenes. Off camera, Dick and Mary grew incredibly close. They worked together almost every day for 5 years, sharing long hours on set rehearsals and creative discussions. Both of them had backgrounds in dance, which gave them a shared language. They understood movement, rhythm, and timing in the same way. This allowed them to perform physical comedy that looked smooth and easy, even though it required great skill. Dick often said that Mary was not just reacting to jokes. She was creating them with him. She understood exactly when to move, pause, or deliver a line to make a moment funny or touching. Their bond deepened as they supported each other through personal struggles. Fame in the 1960s came with intense pressure, and both Dick and Mary faced challenges in their private lives. During difficult days, they leaned on each other for emotional support. They laughed together, encouraged one another, and created a safe space on set where creativity could thrive. Dick once admitted that he had a gentle crush on Mary, but their relationship always remained respectful and rooted in friendship. What they shared was rare and meaningful, built on trust rather than romance. Mary Tyler Moore later went on to become a major star in her own right, leading the Mary Tyler Moore Show and changing how women were portrayed on television. Even as their careers moved in different directions, she and Dick stayed connected. They reunited for specials and remained in contact over the years. When Mary's health began to decline due to complications from diabetes, Dick watched with sadness as someone so full of life faced increasing challenges. In January 2017, when Mary Tyler Moore passed away at the age of 80, the loss deeply affected him. For Dick Van Dyke, losing Mary felt like losing a family member. He often referred to her as his work wife, a term that reflected how close they had been for so long. At her memorial service, Dick spoke not about her fame, but about her heart, discipline, and talent. He credited her as a key reason their show succeeded. Even years later, he continues to speak of her with love and admiration. Her death marked the end of an era for Dick, reminding him that some of the most beautiful chapters of his life now live only in memory. Carl Reiner was far more than a colleague to Dick Van Dyke. He was a creative force who helped shape Dick's most iconic work, and the closest professional partner of his entire life. Their relationship began in the early 1960s when Carl Reiner created a television show originally titled Head of the Family. Carl had written the lead role for himself, but when the pilot was filmed, the network felt that while the writing was strong, the lead actor was not the right fit. Instead of allowing disappointment or ego to get in the way, Carl made a decision that revealed his true character. He stepped aside and handed the role to Dick Van Dyke, recognizing that Dick's energy, warmth, and physical comedy were exactly what the show needed to succeed. That decision changed both of their lives forever. When the show was reworked as a Dick Van Dyke Show, Carl became his creator, head writer, and guiding voice. He carefully built the show around Dick's strengths, allowing his talents to shine naturally. Carl understood Dick in a way few others ever would. He knew how Dick thought, how he moved, and how he delivered a joke. Carl once said that when he wrote comedy, he pictured Dick's face in his mind. This deep understanding created a creative harmony that audiences could feel. Together, they helped redefine television comedy, making it smarter, warmer, and more relatable than anything that had come before. Outside of work, their bond only grew stronger. Over the years, Dick and Carl became inseparable friends. They lived near each other and developed a routine that lasted for decades. Almost every evening, Dick would visit Carl's home, where they would share dinner, watch movies, and talk late into the night. These were not business meetings or rehearsals. They were moments of genuine friendship. They talked about family, aging, comedy, and the changing world around them. For both men, these quiet evenings were as important as any success they had on screen. Their friendship lasted more than 60 years, surviving changes in the industry, personal struggles, and the natural challenges of aging. Carl Reiner was not just a mentor to Dick Van Dyke. He was a brother figure, someone who understood him completely. They balanced each other perfectly. Carl brought sharp wit and thoughtful writing, while Dick brought warmth and physical expression. Together, they created something timeless. Even as they grew older, their bond never weakened. Dick continued visiting Carl regularly. Even in Carl's final years, when his health began to decline in June 2020, Carl Reiner passed away at the age of 98. For Dick Van Dyke, the loss was devastating. Losing Carl was not just losing a friend. It was losing the person who had been by his side for most of his adult life. Dick spoke openly about how quiet the world felt without Carl's laughter. The nightly dinners ended, the conversation stopped, and a familiar presence disappeared. When someone has been part of your daily life for so long, their absence creates a silence that is hard to describe. Dick Van Dyke later reflected that Carl Reiner was the most important partnership of his career and one of the greatest gifts of his life. Their friendship represented everything Dick valued: loyalty, creativity, humility, and joy. Carl's death marked a turning point for Dick, reminding him that he had outlived many of the people who helped shape his journey. Even so, Dick continues to honor Carl's memory by speaking about him with love and gratitude. In doing so, he keeps their shared legacy alive for new generations to appreciate. Walt Disney played a unique and deeply important role in Dick Van Dyke's life, not just as a powerful figure in entertainment, but as a mentor who helped guide him through one of the most important transitions of his career. By the early 1960s, Dick Van Dyke was already a familiar face on television thanks to The Dick Van Dyke Show. Families welcomed him into their living rooms every week, and his reputation as a talented, joyful performer was growing quickly. One of the people who noticed his special energy was Walt Disney. Walt was preparing to make Mary Poppins, a film that would become one of the most beloved movies of all time, and he believed Dick was the perfect choice to play Bert, the cheerful chimney sweep. When Dick and Walt first met to discuss the role, their connection was immediate. Walt admired Dick's ability to move, sing, and perform physical comedy with ease, while Dick admired Walt's imagination and calm authority. Dick surprised Walt by asking to also play the role of Mr. Dawes Sr., the elderly banker in the film. At first, Walt was unsure. Dick was young, athletic, and known for his lively characters. Playing an old man seemed like an unusual request. But Dick was determined. He offered to perform the role without extra pay, and even demonstrated how he could transform himself through movement and voice. Walt recognized Dick's passion and creativity and agreed to let him take on both roles. This decision became one of the most memorable aspects of the film. During the making of Mary Poppins, Walt Disney became more than a producer to Dick Van Dyke. He became a teacher and guiding presence. Dick was moving from the fast-paced world of television into the slower, more demanding world of major motion pictures. Walt helped him understand how to adjust his performance, manage long filming schedules, and handle the pressure of a massive production. Walt often shared advice not just about acting, but about life and creativity. He encouraged Dick to always protect his sense of wonder and to choose projects that brought happiness to people. These lessons stayed with Dick long after the film was finished. The two men shared similar values. Both believed in the power of optimism, imagination, and hard work. Walt admired people who never lost their inner child, and Dick embodied that idea perfectly. They spent time together on the Disney lot, talking about future projects and the direction of entertainment. For Dick, these conversations felt like a masterclass with one of the greatest creative minds of the century. Walt's belief in him gave Dick confidence and helped open doors to new opportunities in film. In 1966, the entertainment world was shaken by the sudden death of Walt Disney. He passed away after being diagnosed with lung cancer, leaving behind a legacy that was still growing. For Dick Van Dyke, the loss was deeply personal. He felt as though the industry had lost its guiding star. The Disney studios felt emptier without Walt walking the halls, offering encouragement and ideas. Dick often reflected on how much Walt's guidance had meant to him, especially during the most important turning point of his career. Even decades later, Walt Disney's influence remained strong in Dick Van Dyke's life. Whenever Dick returned to a Disney project or visited Disneyland, he felt a sense of gratitude and remembrance. Walt had not just given him a career opportunity. He had taught him how to approach entertainment with kindness, imagination, and responsibility. Losing Walt was not just a loss of a mentor. It was a loss of a man who showed Dick how to bring joy to the world, a lesson he continues to carry with him even at 100 years old. Ed Asner represented a different side of television than Dick Van Dyke, yet the bond they shared was built on deep respect, shared history, and a strong sense of purpose. While Dick became famous in the 1960s for his light-hearted, energetic comedy, Ed Asner rose to prominence in the 1970s as Lou Grant on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. His character was gruff, serious, and often intimidating, but underneath that rough exterior was a deep sense of humanity. Off-screen, Ed was much the same way. He was outspoken, passionate, and deeply committed to his beliefs, but also warm and loyal to those he cared about. Through their connection to Mary Tyler Moore and the shared world of classic television, Ed and Dick became close friends. Their paths crossed frequently because their shows were produced by the same creative teams and filmed in the same television environment. The studios in those days felt more like small communities than large corporations. Actors, writers, and directors often worked together across multiple projects, forming bonds that lasted for decades. Dick and Ed developed a mutual admiration for each other's craft. Dick respected Ed's ability to deliver humor without sacrificing seriousness, while Ed admired Dick's unmatched physical comedy and natural charm. Even though their on-screen styles were very different, they understood each other as professionals who cared deeply about the quality of their work. One of the strongest connections between Dick Van Dyke and Ed Asner was their shared dedication to the Screen Actors Guild. Both men believed that acting was not just about fame, but about protecting the people who made the industry possible. They served in leadership roles and worked hard to ensure fair treatment for performers. These efforts brought them closer together, as they spent long hours discussing the future of television, the rights of actors, and the importance of standing up for creative workers. Their conversations were thoughtful and passionate, reflecting their belief that entertainment should serve both artists and audiences. Despite Ed's reputation for being outspoken and politically active, Dick always saw the kindness behind his tough image. He often spoke about how Ed could appear loud or intimidating, but was deeply compassionate at heart. Dick was one of the few people who could easily make Ed laugh and relax. Their friendship was an example of how people with very different personalities can still form deep and lasting bonds. They supported each other through the changes of the industry and the challenges of aging, finding comfort in shared memories and understanding. When Ed Asner passed away in August 2021 at the age of 91, the loss hit Dick Van Dyke particularly hard. By that time, many of the people who defined the golden age of television were already gone. Ed's death felt like the final chapter of a shared generation. For Dick, losing Ed meant losing one of the last people who truly understood what it was like to work during that special period in television history. There were fewer voices left who could reminisce about those early studio days, the long rehearsals, and the excitement of creating something new. Dick paid tribute to Ed by calling him one of the last true actors of their time. He spoke about Ed's honesty, strength, and dedication to the craft. The loss reinforced a painful reality for Dick. Reaching 100 years old meant being one of the last people standing from an era filled with creativity, friendship, and shared purpose. Yet even in grief, Dick found comfort in knowing that their friendship had lasted so long and had been built on respect and shared values. Ed Asner's death marked not just the loss of a friend, but the closing of an important chapter in Dick Van Dyke's extraordinary life. Reaching the age of 100 is a rare achievement, but for Dick Van Dyke, it comes with emotions that are both beautiful and deeply painful. While the world celebrates his long life, Dick carries a heavy reality of having outlived many of the people who helped shape his journey. Living to 100 means being one of the last living witnesses to a golden age of entertainment, a time when television was still discovering itself and friendships were formed through shared creativity rather than competition. For Dick, each year brings gratitude for life, but also reminders of the many voices that are now silent. Throughout his life, Dick Van Dyke worked alongside some of the most influential figures in Hollywood history. These were not just co-workers, but people who shared dreams, struggles, and countless long days on set. In the early days of television, actors relied on each other in ways that are rare today. There were fewer safety nets, fewer guarantees of success, and much more uncertainty. These shared challenges created strong bonds. As Dick looks back now, those friendships feel like family. Losing them one by one has been one of the hardest parts of living such a long life. Dick has often spoken honestly about survivor's guilt. He has questioned why he is still here when so many others are gone. This feeling is not about regret, but about deep love and connection. When you care for people deeply, their absence leaves lasting marks. For Dick, memories are everywhere. A song, a familiar set design, or an old television clip can instantly bring back faces and voices from the past. These memories are comforting, but they can also be painful reminders of loss at the same time. Dick Van Dyke has chosen not to let grief define his final years. Instead, he views his long life as a responsibility. He believes that being one of the last survivors of that era means he must help keep its spirit alive. He continues to speak publicly about his friends, share stories from behind the scenes, and remind younger generations of the people who helped build the foundation of modern entertainment. In doing so, he turns loss into purpose. Aging has also given Dick a unique perspective on time. He understands that success, fame, and awards fade, but relationships endure in memory. The people he misses most are not remembered for their status, but for their kindness, humor, and loyalty. Living to 100 has taught him that life is not measured by how long you live, but by how deeply you connect with others. This belief shapes how he approaches each day, with gratitude rather than fear. In many ways, Dick Van Dyke's life represents a bridge between the past and the present. He stands as a living reminder of a time when creativity was built through collaboration and trust. While he mourns those he has lost, he also celebrates the fact that he was lucky enough to know them at all. Living to 100 is not just about surviving. For Dick, it is about remembering, honoring, and sharing the stories of those who walked beside him during one of the most remarkable eras in entertainment history, as Dick Van Dyke reaches a remarkable milestone of 100 years. His reflections are no longer focused on fame, awards, or even career success. Instead, his thoughts return again and again to the people who walked beside him through life. The deaths of friends, mentors, and creative partners have shaped his understanding of what truly matters. Each loss left a mark, but together they formed a deeper lesson about love, gratitude, and the fragile nature of time. For Dick, remembering those he has lost is not an act of sadness alone. It is an act of honor. Throughout his long life, Dick learned that relationships are the true foundation of happiness. The laughter shared on set, the quiet conversations after long work days, and the support offered during hard times meant more to him than any public applause. When he speaks about those who affected him most, his words are gentle and full of respect. He does not focus on how famous they were, but on who they were as people. This perspective has only grown stronger with age. Dick also understands that grief never fully disappears. It changes shape over time, becoming softer but deeper. At 100, he carries the memories of entire generations. The faces of friends lost to illness, age, and sudden tragedy remain with him. Some days, these memories bring tears. Other days, they bring smiles. Dick has learned to accept both emotions as part of loving deeply. He believes that feeling pain after loss is proof that life was lived with an open heart. Rather than turning away from sorrow, Dick chooses to speak openly about it. He believes that sharing stories of loss helps others feel less alone. In a world that often avoids conversations about aging and death, his honesty offers comfort. He reminds people that loss is a natural part of life, and that remembering those who came before us gives meaning to our own time on earth. His reflections encourage younger generations to value relationships while they still can. Even at 100, Dick Van Dyke remains active, curious, and grateful. He wakes up each day with a sense of appreciation for simply being alive. He knows that every new morning is a gift, especially after saying goodbye to so many loved ones. This gratitude shapes how he sees the world. Instead of asking why loss happens, he focuses on how lucky he was to experience such deep connections in the first place in the end. Dick Van Dyke's story is not just about surviving a century. It is about living fully, loving deeply, and remembering honestly. The celebrity deaths that affected him most were not just famous names. They were friends, teachers, and companions who helped shape his heart. As he looks back on his life, Dick does not measure by years, but by the people who filled those years with meaning. His message is simple but powerful. Life is short, love is everything, and memories are the greatest legacy we leave behind.